Ladies and gentlemen, what I would like to do today is, while the Switch 2 is very exciting and it's really cool, I want to go back and reminisce on the Nintendo Switch a little bit, because I think there was a fact out there that the Switch had over like 12 or 13,000 games, and it's still getting games, which is crazy. But I want to talk about the games that were going to the Switch or had the potential to arrive on the Switch, but for one reason or another were inevitably canceled. Now, some of these games never seen the light of day. Some of these games made an appearance on the Switch too, and some of them just sound so strange. So if you can't hear my voice, I am still sick. And it always makes you reminisce to a time where you weren't sick, right? Like at night, I can barely breathe through my nose. So then I think about all the times where I could breathe through my nose. And a lot of those times were back on my Switch. So we are in fact reminiscing today. In this video, we're going to go over 23 official games that were coming to the Switch, but were canceled for one reason or another. And these aren't like random little indie games or like shovelware. These were huge official games that were canceled. So before we get started, if you could hit a like and subscribe, that would truly mean the world to me. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter so we can keep these communities growing. And let's just go ahead and get started on this list. So the first game we're talking about is Ballistic NG. This was a Wipeout-inspired racing game originally released on PC platforms in 2018. A Switch version was in development for multiple years as well. However, the game ran on the Unity game engine and was canceled in 2023 in response to its controversial runtime fee announced later that year. And the developer and publisher of this was Neonosis, I guess. I guess this is just a racing game, nothing too special. Now, another game that was canceled was Crash Team Rumble. This was an online multiplayer game starring Crash Bandicoot that was released for PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and the Series consoles. A Nintendo Switch version was intended for a later release, and it was even in development, but was canceled due to poor critical and commercial reception of the release versions. And honestly, as big as a Crash fan I am, this one was probably a good thing that it never made an appearance on the Switch. Now, one of the most famous canceled games that we now know that Nintendo even told us this, that was going to come to the Switch, but was held off for the Switch 2, is Donkey Kong Bonanza. Development initially began for the Nintendo Switch, but upon learning of the Nintendo Switch 2 and the powers and the resources, the team decided to push the game to the newer system, believing the Switch 2 would be able to handle the gameplay concepts that they wanted to implement, and it turns out that was the right choice. Now, speaking of Donkey Kong, this next game sounds just so cool. I'm not sure if this was the official title or not, but it's called Donkey Kong Freedom. And while this was never publicly announced by any of the companies involved, Nintendo reportedly impressed by Vicarious Visions and Activision's handling of Donkey Kong and Bowser in the Wii U versions of Skylanders. They greenlit Vicarious Visions to develop a new Donkey Kong game the following year for the Switch. Plans included it being a 3D platformer with an emphasis on Tony Hawk Pro Skater-like grinding across tree vines. The game was in development for 6 months, but I guess it was canceled so Activision could focus on the Call of Duty franchise. What the hell? That's a horrible decision. I wish we could have played this game. So we also have Evil Dead the game. This was originally released for Windows, PlayStation, and Xbox platforms in 2022. A Switch version was set to follow, but was canceled in September of 2023 alongside future content updates. The restructuring program of Embrace Your Group was named a possible reason that this just fell through. And I guess that was through Saber Interactive and Boss Team Games working on this. So a rumor I had heard for quite a while was we were also going to get Final Fantasy 15, and director Hajime Tabata stated that Square Enix attempted to get the game running on the Switch hardware in 2017, but were unable to get it performing well enough to warrant releasing it. So instead, a port of Final Fantasy 15 Pocket Edition was released for the Switch in 2018 instead. And I know there's a lot of rumors right now of this game coming over to the Switch 2, so I guess time will tell. Allegedly, we were also going to get Football Manager 2025, and I guess they tried to do this multiple times, but every time they would get into development, it just wasn't working out. So the team instead decided to cancel the game in favor on focusing on the 2026 version of this game, which I know absolutely nothing about, but I guess Sega is involved, which is interesting. So there was a really interesting game called Harmony. This was a game in development by Retro Studios that involved playing as a fairy that could transform in appearance in order to solve puzzles. While never officially announced, it reportedly featured a protracted difficult development cycle in which they were not happy with the progress after years of work, eventually leading to its cancellation. In 2025, a playable build was found on an early dev kit and leaked onto the internet. Say what you will about Metroid Prime 4, Retro Studios does do great work, but we know that game was in like development hell, so working on another game for multiple years does not seem like a smart choice when you couldn't even get Metroid Prime 4 out until the end of 2025. So I can't find much about this title, but it was called Hyper Sports R, and this was first announced at E3 in 2018. The game was in development for 2 years before being canceled in June of 2020. The only thing Konami said was it was canceled due to various circumstances. So yeah, that's all I can say about that one. So we also have Hyrule Warrior Age of Imprisonment, and this is another game that was allegedly going to come to the Switch, like the tail end of the Switch's life, but they canceled that idea in favor of releasing this for the Switch 2. And then I think I read, once they decided to put this on the Switch 2 instead of the Switch, they like developed even more of the game and added to it and really expanded upon it. So sure, they probably could have got this running on the Switch, but I think waiting for the Switch 2 was definitely the right choice here. So the next game we're talking about is technically a crossover, and it's a LEGO Civilization crossover. In 2025, in a leak of an old Switch dev kit, there was content indicating that a video game crossover between the LEGO and Civilization franchise was in development. A title screen was found, though the game itself is not playable or bootable beyond the startup screen. It just almost makes too much sense, right? A Civ LEGO crossover? It could work on so many different ways, so I wonder if this is something that we might see again one day. So famously, Mario Kart World was initially developed for the Switch as well, and I think development began all the way back in 2017, right after the release of the Switch. But they just kept adding stuff and making it open world, and then, added 24 players being able to race, so it's kind of ambitious. Again, maybe it would have worked on the Switch, but 100% waiting for the Switch 2 was the right choice. So I just read an article and it says after they did the downloadable content for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, like the booster course passes, that's when they officially decided to save Mario Kart World for the Switch 2. So it seems like they were actually developing this for the Switch for like a substantial amount of time. So a game called Marvel Midnight Suns was also going to come to the Switch. This was announced in 2021, and then versions for the PlayStation and Xbox finally released in 2022 and 2023. And then I guess when the final version came out, they said that the Switch version was officially canceled, with no official reason given, but a lot of people speculated it was due to poor sales on other platforms. So I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this next title. Occultic 9 New World. This was released in Japan for the PlayStation 4, PlayStation Vita, and Xbox One, but I guess it was received very poorly, so they thought, well, we'll release some DLC with it and make like a whatever edition, like a complete edition, and then we'll release that on the Switch as well. And I guess this was in development, but that version was quietly canceled in August of 2022. A game called Pathfinder Kingmaker was released on PC platforms in 2018, and then console versions were announced for 2020. The PS4 and Xbox versions were finally released, I guess, and then there was a Switch version that was in development as well, but this one was canceled, and I can't find any reason why it was canceled. So yeah, that's all I can say about this one. So interestingly enough, Persona 3 Reload was going to come to the Switch, and this game is fantastic. I actually just played this on my Switch 2, like last month. I gave up after 30 hours because it gets really repetitive, but I did have fun. So they said that they were even working on a Switch port, but development was eventually stalled due to technical constraints that would have required reworking the UI and art elements to tailor the game around the console's limitations. And I do think whenever the game first came out, it was pretty rough around the edges. And this is just a theory, but I feel like the version we got on the Switch 2 was almost a build that they did for the Switch. They eventually patched it and made it a lot better, but I do feel like the version we initially got on the Switch 2 was the Switch version. Just a theory, but I really feel strongly about that. But I guess the Switch version, if it was going to get finished, was going to come out in 2024 or 2025. Yeah, maybe even 2024. Interesting. Another game was called Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. This was released for PC platforms in 2018 with console versions to follow. And while the PlayStation 4 and Xbox versions eventually came out in 2020, a Switch version was supposed to come out a couple years later, but unfortunately in 2022 the Switch version was officially canceled, with developers citing difficulties in getting the game running on the system. So this next entry is absolutely insane because this was confirmed from Game Freak that we were going to get this. And I'm talking about Pokémon Legends, Ho-Oh, and Lugia. Among internal documents seized from developer Game Freak during a ransomware attack on the company in 2014, which were eventually titled like GigaLeaks or TerraLeaks or something, there were plans that the studio was initially planning for their second entry in the Pokémon Legends sub-series following Arceus to comprise 2 games set in the Johto region from Pokémon Gold and Silver. They were proposed as an origin story for the first Pokemon trainers and involving the protagonist journeying to the Burn Tower, a predecessor to the Bell Tower perched on by Ho-Oh. The game was cancelled in favor of developing and releasing Pokémon Legends EA for the Switch and Switch 2. And while those games are fun, dude, Pokémon Legends, Ho-Oh, and Lugia would probably be so much better, so much more interesting, so I hope they circle back and eventually work on this. So this is actually funny because I'm going off articles and news reports, because this game was cancelled for the Switch, but a trailer just released a few days ago, and it's officially coming to the Switch now and Switch 2. And it's called Ratatan, and I believe this is the same developers as Papaton, or whatever the hell the game is called. Originally announced in 2023 as a multi-platform release that included the Switch version, they said the Switch version had been dropped in favor of a Switch 2 version. Oh, so maybe the trailer I've seen recently is only for the Switch 2, but the timing is just really funny because that trailer came out this week, and the game actually looks very interesting, like a rhythm action game or something. So yeah, kind of interesting. I don't know if there's an official Switch version for this game, but I know it's coming at least to the Switch 2, but I don't see why it couldn't run on the Switch. So I guess an untitled Ridge Racer game was also in development for the Switch. In 2025, an old Switch dev kit was found to have an unannounced entry from the Ridge Racer franchise being worked on for the Switch. The content was found dated back to 2017, and as such was considered to be cancelled and no longer an active project from the publications. The early build was in a rough state, but it was playable, and the footage actually leaked onto the internet. Maybe this is one of those Ridge Racer games that came out for the Switch too, or is coming out. There really is so many of them. So a game that I wish would come over, at least maybe to the Switch 2, we were going to get RoboCop Rogue City. A video game based on the RoboCop franchise was announced for the Switch, PS5, Xbox Series X, and PC platforms in 2022, though the Switch version was cancelled 1 month prior to the game's release, which is insane. This is like a huge hidden gem I know on the PS5. I never knew there was a Switch version announced, so while there was no official reason given why the Switch version was cancelled, it was probably just too ambitious. But you know, Switch 2, hey, what are we doing there? So there was a game called Sengoku Nightblood. There was a Switch version of this 2017 mobile game that was announced, but was later cancelled in October 2019 due to various circumstances. The mobile version terminated service 2 months later, so that's interesting. But it was developed or published by Marvelous, so it might have been decent, but yeah, that's how these things go. So a game called Steep was also going to come to the Switch, and this one is very interesting because this is one of the first third-party games announced for the Switch prior to launch, right? This is coming up to the Switch's launch. This is going to be one of the first third-party games we get, but this was later canceled in August 2018 in favor of providing live service content, yucky, gross, I hate reading those words, to the PS4 and Xbox One versions instead. This is from Ubisoft, and you know, what do we even say with Ubisoft, right? They are blessed with making great games. They are cursed with making business decisions. And we have Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. The game was initially announced in 2020 to be released for the Switch alongside versions of the PS5, PS4, and Xbox consoles. However, no further mentions of the Switch version were made when it was announced in 2022 that the PS4 and Xbox One versions were being canceled, so they could focus on making like the PS5 and Xbox Series versions. The Switch logo was present on the game's official website as recently as July of 2023, but it was absent from press release later on that month. The game eventually released for the PS5 and Xbox consoles in September of 2024, so this is a game I could truly see popping up on the Switch 2 really at any time. Look, don't get me wrong, I love my Switch 2, right? It's a console I'm truly in love with. I play it all the time, and it's very impressive. But I honestly think the Switch is one of the most underrated consoles of all time. Like, I know it broke sales records and I know people rate it so high, but what I mean is what it was able to do. Like, this console was $200. A $200 console now, it's not happening. But then you have to remember, a $200 console this size could play games like The Witcher 3 and Tears of the Kingdom and Skyrim and No Man's Sky. And you could actually play those games and enjoy them. So when you read these games that were canceled, it's like, yeah, it probably couldn't have run. But some of them probably could have. So I just find it so interesting that while we were able to get games like The Witcher 3 and the Doom series and Wolfenstein and Skyrim, I'm trying to think of like really taxing games. Some of these games just couldn't cut it, right? Some of them were saved for the Switch 2, which is the right idea. But in my opinion, some of them definitely could have ran on the Switch, like Persona 3 Reload. So I just find this so interesting, and I hope you do too. So in the comments below, I would love to hear from you guys. What games did you wish we could have got on the Switch? Do you hope any of these games come to the Switch too? Just start a conversation. And I know I sound ridiculous. You hear that? I sound ridiculous. So thanks for bearing with me. It really means the world. So hit a like and subscribe on the way out. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and consider becoming a channel member. And you guys know me. I'll see you very soon with a new video. Peace!